Welcome to the X9 YouTube channel. In today's video, we will demonstrate a live, secure, QR code-based payment built on the Draft X9.150 standard, with funds moving via FedNow. This innovative payment method showcases the future of fast, secure transactions. The Draft standard is being developed by the X9A4 Working Group. For more information about the financial standards work of X9 or our QR code payments work, please contact X9 staff at the email displayed on the screen. Now, I will turn the presentation over to the X9A4 chair, Sarah Hoisington, to introduce herself and the other members of the panel.
Thanks for joining us today. We are really excited to be here to share details about the payment QR code standard that the X9A4 work group is developing, and to bring that standard to life with a live demo that can show what it can enable. So my name is Sarah Hoisington. I'm the chair of the X9A4 Payments QR Code Work Group. And I'm with Matera. So we're a company with over 30 years of experience providing technology to the financial services industry. With me today are the two vice chairs of the X9 QR Code Work Group and the former chair of the Faster Payments Council QR Code Work Group. So before we go any further, I would love for everyone to introduce themselves. So maybe Jeff, you could start us off, followed by Steve, and then Keith.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So most of you know me as the X9F4 Work Group Chair, but Sarah asked me to be her vice chair to help foster this along. So my focus on this work is around the security and the use of digital signatures, but we'll get into that later.
Hi, I'm Steve Mott. I've been in payments for 43 years, and this is one of the more interesting developments that I've had the privilege and opportunity to participate in, because I think it's a really easy way to get into a truly digital transactional environment. I was a vice chair of the Faster Payments Council QR Code Work Group and transitioned over with Sarah and Jeff to put this interesting group together to figure out how to do a payment QR code that everybody in the world can use, and we can all be digital together.
Great, and I'm Keith Riddle. I'm the general manager of Payfinia. I'm just under Steve in terms of time in financial services and payments, and I think I'm at 39 years in the industry, but very excited to be part of the webinar. I'm also one of the past chairs of the QR code interface work group, and we are the payment services provider that has enabled this exciting user experience that we'll demo for you today in terms of QR code payments.
Great. Well, we have a lot in store for today. So Steve is going to kick us off with a little history on the evolution of QR codes to explain how it was a natural and needed decision for X9 to help the financial services sector in the US to standardize an exciting new way to pay. We're going to share specifically the purpose and scope of our work group effort here at X9. We're going to make it really clear that we're focused on payment QR codes, not URL QR codes, and what's the difference between the two. The live demo comes after that, where you'll see Keith pay an invoice by scanning a payment QR code and move money from his credit union account to a bank account in seconds. Then we're going to explain how that instant payment transaction was enabled by the standard that's being developed. Jeff is going to outline the security and how fundamental it is to this standard and the ways that this standard is going to outline how to protect the data throughout a QR code payment. And finally, we'll leave time for Q&A at the end. And as Ambria mentioned, if you do have questions throughout, please type them in the chat box and we will get to them at the end. All right, well, with that, let's get started. So Steve, turning it over to you to provide a condensed history of QR codes to explain how it led us to standardize payment QR codes for the US.
Thank you, Sarah. To be fair, this was a 25 slide presentation that's boiled down to one slide here. I'm kind of fascinated, as you might guess, by QR codes. The history effectively goes back to the Morse code in 1830s, where you had the equivalent of a dot and a dash or a 1 and a 0 ultimately as we've progressed along with trying to figure out how to communicate to machines the way that we communicate as human beings. But QR codes found its first footing 1994. DensoWave, a business unit of Toyota, was trying to figure out how to track autos and auto parts through the production process. To do barcodes, there's a very limited amount of data that you could use at that time, which was how most manufacturers did that kind of manufacturing tracking. And instead of putting 5 or 6 or 10 or 20 sometimes barcodes, he came up with this idea of how to do a QR code. And we don't have time today, but if you look at how the QR code is assembled, how you can see it from almost any direction because of the 3 corner boxes and that sort of thing, it turned out to be a very effective, clever, and useful and scalable way to do interesting kinds of things with data. In the 2000s, by the way, DensoWave didn't patent this. They left it all open for people to develop around it. In the 2000s, there was rapid adoption in manufacturing. It even became standardized around ISO, and in some ways paralleled how ASCII developed. And again, with the bits and the bytes and the ones and the zeros and the dots and the dashes, all trying to figure out how to communicate to machines more effectively. Then smartphone cameras came along. First ones in Japan in 2002, and then the smartphone iPhone in 2007 and beyond, and then dynamic QR codes added to the capability to do even more intelligent things more efficiently with QR codes. And so the applications began to diverse, especially in retail or marketing. The use explodes. The idea of being able to look at a billboard or a magazine ad or something like that and not just get information, but to begin to segue into interactions that QR codes were able to facilitate. If you look in Asia, almost everything is done by QR codes. But if you look in the US, it's a lot of stuff's being done by QR codes as well. And in fact, US and Europe are leaders, I think, in the world now for all the different types of uses of QR codes in the economic processes we have. Importantly, in 2021, EMVCo introduced global specs for QR code payments. They're now utilized in some form or another as a foundation in dozens of countries, 50, 60 different countries at this point. And that is the door that opens for us to then say, now we could come up with a multi-payment capability, however you want to pay with the QR code that you'll be able to use around the world, any way, any place you want, with security and comfort and user convenience. So that's the history.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. Well, as you mentioned, QR codes have taken off around the world, but there's a lot of ways that they're used. And so without a common standard, paying with a QR code, risks becoming fragmented between banks, apps, and networks, and maybe being incompatible. So the purpose of what we're doing is to define a standardized approach for QR code-based payment initiation. So the goal is to ensure that the payments are secure, interoperable, and can be real-time regardless of the network, channel, or the device. And that gets us to the heart of our standards. So what exactly is our focus? Well, for those familiar with QR code payments, there's a lot of different types. We got merchant presented, consumer presented, static, and dynamic. Rather than trying to solve for everything at once, the work group made a strategic decision to focus on merchant presented, dynamically generated QR codes. So this approach could allow for stronger security controls, and it supports a wide variety of real world payment scenarios. So, and also, we took a comprehensive approach. So we really wanted to define the end-to-end requirements for enabling secure QR code payments. Many of you are also aware of a standard, an X9 standard that was approved recently. It's X9.148, which provides a framework for applying digital signatures and cryptographic protection to data in payment QR codes. But it doesn't specify what data must be signed, or where the signature should be placed, or the full structure of the QR code or the payload content. And that's the gap this standard is designed to fill. And there's really 4 key areas where we're focused. One is the QR code itself. So what data goes in it and how is it formatted? The payload, which is really the payment details that the QR code points to. So how the data in the payload, what is the data? How is that structured? There's a payment notification, which is how the payers, payment service provider confirms the payment to the payee's payment service provider, and then security. So how each of these components is digitally signed and validated to ensure trust. We do have diagrams that will explain each of these in more detail after the demo. So who's working on this? We've got over 60 people across 25 companies from every corner of the payments ecosystem: banks, merchants, payment networks, vendors, POS providers, and related vendors. So it's a really cool group that we have that's come together to work on this together, because again, one of the main goals is interoperability, and in payments, we need a lot of players to agree on what exactly the standard should include. I do want to emphasize this standard is focused on payment QR codes, not URL QR codes. I'm guessing many of you have been to a restaurant, scanned a QR code to get a menu, or been in the grocery store and seen a product that has a QR code on it where you can get a recipe. I just bought a coffee maker recently, and I was given a QR code so that I could get instructions on how to set it up. These are URL QR codes. You scan them from your mobile phone camera, and they redirect you to more information about something. URL QR codes don't work well for payments. They're really vulnerable to fraud and scams. If they are used for payments, typically the payer has to type in their payment credentials. It could be bank account routing number, it could be credit card information. Payment QR codes have to be scanned from within an authenticated mobile app. Digital signatures govern access to sensitive information. And our focus in this standard is the payment QR codes that are presented by the merchant to be scanned by a payer, and QR codes that are dynamic, which means they're generated for one specific transaction to be paid once. And while payment QR codes may not be a standard way to pay in the US today, it might seem audacious to think we could design a standard for them in the US, but as Steve kind of mentioned, they are widely used outside the US. And I'm going to turn it back over to Steve to explain where and how our QR code work group, where we researched and studied how these other countries implemented payment QR codes to inform our standards. So we didn't have to start from scratch.
Yeah, we obviously started in China in 2004 as China was seeking to move toward electronic transacting in a digital payment realm. They decided not to go cards and POS systems and the way that the rest of the world had done with card payments, but to look for something else. In particular, could they use bank accounts and access bank accounts and make the transaction environment something that leveraged what was an explosive growth that was starting in mobile devices and has continued in that country to where something like 80% of the transactions are mobile, and probably about the same amount are accessing bank accounts, and doing it in a way that was faster, simpler, safer, and more gratifying for consumers. So you could argue, well, China's a country that self-directs what it does. How is that extensible to the U.S.? Well, we looked at some other countries for some clues. I think the most interesting one for me was Brazil, where the PIX system, which is a P2P system, now accounts for over 50% of electronic payments. It's almost twice what credit and debit cards are today. And that's in what, Sarah, 3 or 4 years, 5 years, something like that?
5 years now. Took off.
And I mean, you can pay a bongo player on Copacabana Beach a tip or whatever else they might be selling with Pix, and you can see it a variety of different places. Pix is now available in the United States, where it's come across the border, and people from Brazil who have a Pix account, and potentially, as China did with Alipay and WeChat Pay, we could all have accounts like that. Singapore was my favorite. I spent a lot of time there looking at Pay Now and how electronic wallets, digital wallets, mobile wallets have completely swept the payment landscape and into how we all start to around the world figure out new ways to do things much better digitally than we've ever done before. So worldwide, there's a tremendous take up that we were able to observe, and it's not so different from the U.S. And when we saw with COVID-19, a lot of the world transitioning over to say, we don't want to touch stuff. We don't want to pass cards among each other. We want to do something else. And then when we got the real-time payment systems, particularly those using requests for payment, looking for ways to how you can initiate a transaction, look what popped up, QR codes. And so with the help and initiation from EMVCo, now we have a broader charter to say, any way you want to pay, it could be a digital wallet, payment mechanism. In some countries like Indonesia have 300 or 400 that they use. It really doesn't make any difference. The QR code format and structure and how we're trying to fashion its functionality in a secure way, in an interoperable way, looks like the best means that we have to that digital future.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll add to all of this is that, you know, if you look at, because of all of the implementations across the world, there are global brands out there that have already embraced payment QR codes, right? Amazon.com, prime example. In Brazil, when you go to checkout and you want to pay instantly, you got a QR code that you can actually scan from your mobile banking app and pay. Shell gas stations, they actually print a receipt with a QR code at the bottom in Brazil where you can scan and pay that instantly. Burger King, McDonald's, Pizza Hut, you know, these are all brands we know well in the US. Well, if you go to any of these places in Brazil, you can actually scan a QR code and pay instantly. So the point is, payment QR codes aren't some experimental concept. They're already being used at scale by major global brands. What we're doing is bringing that proven model to the US with a secure, standardized approach. All right, with that, we are going to move on to the demo. And before we actually show it to you, we want to give you some context of who's who. So in this demo, Keith is going to play a dual role here. We've got Riddle Inc. is the biller. He's going to have an invoice, and he has a Citibank. Riddle Inc. has a Citibank account. Customer in this transaction is a guy named Keith Riddle. He's buying cookies from Riddle Inc. He's got a Star One credit union account. So what we're demoing is a bill payment example, right? So we have an invoice that's going to have a QR code that he's going to scan and pay. Matera, the company I work for, generated the dynamic one-time use QR code on the invoice that is generated in compliance with the draft X9 standard that we're working on. Payfinia, Keith's company, created this composable experience so that his Star One credit union mobile app has the ability to scan and pay that QR code. So that's who's who in the demo. Let me kind of walk through the steps, right? So we're going to show the invoice. That's sort of step one. You got an invoice with details and a QR code at the bottom. Step two is Keith's going to scan the QR code from his Star One mobile app. Step three is he's going to get presented with the details from that invoice in his app. He's going to review, authorize payment. Step four is money's going to move from his Star One account to Riddle Inc.'s Citi account. And then step five is everyone is going to get notified that the money got moved. So that's what we're going to walk through here in this demo. Let me start with the invoice. You can see it's invoice 1001. Biller is Keith Riddle, Riddle Inc., I should say. Customer is Keith Riddle. We've got a due date of 8/25. We can see the item he's buying is cookies, and the total amount due is $1.05. And there's the QR code at the bottom that Keith is scanned for payment. And at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Keith can share his and show everyone the mobile experience that he goes through to scan this.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. I'm assuming everybody can see the mobile experience just fine?
We can see it.
Very good. So as Sarah indicated, so again, a little bit of backdrop in terms of Payfinia. What we do are driving these composable payment experiences. And you can see there's one to the left of the QR code payment experience called instant account-to-account transfer. That actually was our first experience that helped to drive an instant send through the FedNow service. And we generated that first FedNow send transaction in the country, and supporting Star One, who was a member who found that and delivered their first payment back when FedNow started. So what we've done is actually designed this composable experience. So I start out and I've received this invoice from Riddle, highly trusted merchant. So I'm going to go ahead and say that I'm going to scan the QR code. I'm going to allow the camera to scan the QR code. And what will happen pretty quickly is that you'll see that the invoice that Sarah indicated has been captured as part of the payload exchange, leveraging the draft standard, captured as part of that QR code, which again, Sarah already indicated and reviewed. It shows all the information associated with it, the business, the payment due date, if I wanted to schedule it in the future, but obviously we're here to show an instant payment. You can see at the bottom that there are additional options that can be infused within this composable experience for either ACH or other wallet experiences you may want to infuse for payment alternatives. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and pay the secure payment of $1.05. It's processing the payment. So this is a production transaction. It's debiting from my Star One account. It's going to my Citibank account. In a matter of a few seconds, the payment's been processed. You can look actually in the full round trip IDs associated with the transaction. I'll say that's done because I've paid Riddle for the cookies. I'll go ahead and you can see the full experience. If I go to the transaction data associated with my Star One account, it would reflect the $5 being sent. You can see the $5 withdrawal from my account and the transaction data associated with that instant payment that's been sent to my Citi account for Riddle. So if I log out of here, and I'll go ahead and log into my Citi experience, just so you can show the aspect of it being posted to my Citi account. And you can see in the Citi checking account, there is a $1.05 transaction. Sorry for that pop-up. $1.05 transaction that is pending because it hasn't completed through a posting process that Citi supports, but it's available to me for usage. You can see all the data associated with the round trip transaction that's been originated from our platform as the originating sender of that transaction into the receiver. So if there were ever a question about that transaction, we have admin controls on the back end where the user, meaning the user can contact Star One in this case, and Star One could perform research. So that basically is the flow for the composable payment origination or initiation experience in a request to pay that came to me for cookies. It's been fully settled and processed as part of that overall secure exchange of QR code data and the initiation of the payment.
Awesome. Great.
Sign off of there.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Keith. That was a great example of really the payment QR code that we saw in action is really was developed in accordance with X9, and it kind of showcases what it can do. At this point, I'm going to share my screen again, and what we'd like to do is take you behind the scenes and explain how payment QR codes work to understand how the standard being developed enables that instant money movement. What we have here is a high level of the different parties that are involved in a payment QR code. There's really four, right? The payer, the payee. We've got the payer PSP, right? Payment service provider, could be a bank, could be a processor. The payee PSP, And ultimately, the QR code itself is just a way for these four parties to exchange information securely. And I think it's important to note also at the bottom, the payment network used to move the funds is separate from the QR code itself, right? So the standard that we're working on is designed to be flexible. So it can allow billers and merchants to accept payments from FedNow, RTP, ACH, credit push, and push to card. But it's also open by design, meaning other payment networks like PayPal, Venmo, Zelle, they could choose to adopt the standard to support QR code-based payments on their platforms as well. So let's walk through, click the screen. Let's walk through how the process might work kind of behind the scenes in that bill payment example. So let's say you've got a biller, they've got an invoice that needs to get paid. So they request their payment services provider to generate a one-time use QR code for that invoice. The biller is likely sharing some information, customer name, invoice number, amount due, due date, and so on. All that information is stored securely at the payee's, at the biller's payment services provider. And what the PSP does is they generate a QR code from that information, and it's represented in two ways: a string of information and then that visual image that's generated from that string. So one of the things that's in the scope of our standard is the QR code itself. So what data fields are included in that string? What's the format that they must follow? We are using the EMV compliant QR code format, which is the global spec published by EMVCo, to ensure that the QR code we define can be interpreted by payment systems around the world to support broader interoperability. The QR code string itself doesn't have a lot of information in it. It's like 11 data fields. It's merchant name, currency, country code, city. But there is one really important field in there. It's literally 26.01. It's a URL. The URL points to where there is more information about that transaction. We call it the payload, but that's what that field is for in the QR code itself, and more on the payload in a minute. So we've got a QR code that's been generated. It's been put on an invoice. The payer is going to log into their mobile app, scan the QR code. The mobile app's going to read that string, the QR code string, and it's going to see that URL, and it's going to, oh, I got to go make a call to get more information about this invoice. So it's going to ultimately request a payload from the payee's PSP. Well, when the payer's PSP makes that call, that's where digital signatures come in that Jeff is going to talk about in a minute. That's another item in the scope of our standard. So the payer's PSP needs to digitally sign that request so the receiver can be sure they can trust them. Once validated, the payee's PSP responds with the payload, but the payee's PSP must sign the payload so the payer's PSP can trust them. And the standard we're working on outlines the requirements for this validation process. So we've got now the payer's PSP, they have the payload. They're going to take some of the elements from the payload and show it to the payer, just like Keith, when he scanned the QR code, could see some key information, the biller, how much is owed, what he's paying for, so that the payer can go in, review their invoice information, and authorize the payment. Well, at this point, once payment's been authorized, the payer's PSP has all the information they need to message a payment network to move the money. So they, like in the case of a FedNow, which we did here in this demo, they, in the PAX 008, they can put the payee's financial account information, you know, credit union account or bank account and routing number, whichever it is, the payer's financial account information, put it in a PAX-08, send it to FedNow. That PAX-08 comes to the payee's PSP. They authorize that, yep, I can accept payment. And when that PAX-02 comes back from the payment network to the payee's PSP, they can move money into the correct bank account or credit union account. And then they can also update the QR code to paid. So one of the other things that's in our standard that we're focused on is the payment notification piece. You'll see that we have, there is potentially, and we're working on kind of how a payment notification might get triggered, but the payer's PSP can actually message the payee's PSP information about the payment, right? So there is an ability for like a payer to add a tip. They may actually adjust the amount that's due. Well, it'd be really great if the payee's PSP would be informed of some of those changes because they don't know about any of that since they sent the payload. So that's another kind of part of the standard that we're working on are what are the data fields in that payment notification and what's the security around it. So that is the round trip here. Hopefully that illustrates how the work of our work group directly supports the type of real-time secure payment experience that we showed in the demo. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff, who's going to walk through some information around security to better understand kind of how we're working on that vis-a-vis the standard.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'm going to say this as a joke, so take it that way, please. As usual, the security guy gets a slide to talk to. And that's all they want to know about. So she mentioned earlier X9.148. We developed that out of the X9F4 work group, and its title is, I'm going to read it to you here so I don't get it wrong. It's Quick Response Codes, QR Codes, Protection Using Cryptographic Solutions. So we built that standard so you could actually protect the QR code, whether it was a digital signature, possibly with encryption. For the purposes of X9.140, we're planning to use digital signatures. So of course, digital signature 101, the signer is going to have the private key to sign whatever the object is. And then the receiver of that object is going to have the public key in a public key certificate to actually do the verification. Now, if you look on the right side, right now, we're looking at 4 different digital signatures. There's going to be a signature on the QR code itself. There's going to be a signature on the payload request, which was somewhere in that flow of things that Sarah just went through. There's going to be a signature on the payload return and a signature on the payload notification, assuming that that is actually used in the flow. We're planning to use the X9 Financial PKI. So let me talk to that just for the moment. The X9 Financial PKI has been stood up. We are up and running. We have a development environment. We have a test UAT environment, and we actually have production up and running. For another use case, we're issuing TLS certificates right now. We're actually selling certificates. We are actually live and running. However, what we're doing is there's a series of root CAs. We have an RSA root CA, ECDSA. We're going to do an MLDSA that's going to be stood up in the test environment very quickly. It could be no later than August, actually. I hope, fingers crossed there. We're waiting on the production for the MLDSA only because our provider that we selected for this, DigiCert, is waiting on the NIST to complete the FIPS evaluation. And as soon as that's done, we will be standing up the production environment. So meanwhile, what we're planning to do is each specific use case will have a separate issuing CA where we think that's appropriate. And we're doing that for the QR codes. So the QR code issuing CA in UAT has not been stood up. That will be very quickly, as I said. And then we can get test certificates, and then we can start testing this. So in all clarification here, full disclosure, this demo you saw did not have digital signatures. There was no overall security on this. That is going to be the next big step. Okay. So we will stand up the financial PKI with the QR code issuing CA. They'll be able to generate test certificates and be able to test this out on the all four digital signatures that we're talking about, on the QR code, the payment request, the payload return, and the payment notification. Now, the way this is going to work is whatever entity, and I came from the payment side, retail. So when Sarah talks about, and I have to go look at her other slide real quick on my computer, when she is talking payee, my brain's thinking merchant, okay? When she's thinking payee PSP, I'm thinking of the acquirer. That's the terms I learned. When you're talking about the payer, I'm thinking the card holder. When you're talking about the payer PSP, that is the issuer. So that's kind of where I'm come from, and that's how I wrote up the use case. So if you see some differences in the terminology, that's my bad. And we're working on the 150 to get all the terminology cleaned up. But basically, there's the object to be signed. That object is the QR code, the payload request, the payload return, and or the payload, the payment notification. Then there's the actual signature over the object. And then there's going to be the X9 certificate chain. So right now, this is going to be whoever did the digital signature, they're going to have the QR code certificate. That's going to chain up to the issuing CA, which we're standing up shortly, and that's going to chain to one of the routes. Right now for the demo, we're planning to do RSA signatures. As I said, ECDSA will be available and MLDSA will be as soon as we can get that stood up. In that slide, you see the link to the X9 PKI, and you also see the link to the DigiCert where these root CA and issuing CA certificates have already been posted and are available.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thanks, Jeff. One of the questions we have gotten before is, gosh, we have these different things that do need to be signed, but you can use the same key, right, to generate you don't have to have 4 different keys if you're signing 4 different things, right, Jeff? So it's one key to generate the certificate can be applied to multiple things in a QR code transaction. Is that a fair way to say it?
Almost, yeah. Basically what we're saying is whoever generates the object and signs the object will have a private key for signature and have a public key certificate so that the receiver can verify the signature on the object. So if the, I have to go back to your slide here. So if the payee or the payee PSP is generating the signature on the QR code and the signature on the payload request, no, actually, that would be the payor PSP would request the signature on the payload request. Is that right?
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so
Still learning terminology.
the,
So
But-
the payee, sure I've got my terminology right. Yeah. So the payee PSP, the acquirer, would generate the QR code and sign it, would generate the payload return and sign it, but the payor PSP, aka the issuer, might generate the payload request and then do the signature on it. Now, this is assuming these things are happening at the host level. If it turns out that the cardholder smartphone is smart enough to generate some of this and generate the digital signatures, then the cardholder might actually have a certificate. If the payment notification is being done at the merchant level, then the merchant might have it. But whoever's doing it, they will have a public key for signing for QR codes and a certificate for verifying that will be handed off as part of the certificate chain.
Yeah, and I think because there could be a wide variety of entities that might need a digital certificate, the way you've structured the, allowable entities, it's quite broad because we don't know, we don't want to limit it to just like a financial institution, for example. It's going to be written very broad.
Right. So merchants, merchant providers, financial institutions, acquire issuers, they can all get their certificate for participating in the QR code payments.
Yeah, and I think right now the plan is to only allow certificates issued by the X9 Financial PKI for these QR code payments, right? Versus like letting any sort of certificate authority issue them.
Well, yeah, that question has come up. We're going to have to talk about that in the work group. We could say you shall use the X9 Financial PKI, full stop. We could say you must use an approved X9 Financial PKI. Well, that's the same thing. You could say you should, but then other people might use something different. But even if we put a shall, there's no standards police out there, right? The saying, oh, you didn't use the right PKI. It's all. So we're going to have to figure out how we're going to word that correctly. Maybe there are other folks that want to use this, but you know, if they're going to follow the standard, we'd prefer them to use the X9 financial PKI. But as I said, we're going to have that discussion.
Yep, for sure. Okay, great. Well, that takes us to the end of our slide deck. Thank you so much, Jeff, for the security overview. That was great. I'm going to stop sharing at this point so that we can take some questions from the group. I think there have been some things popping up, but I have not been keeping track. I don't know, Steve, if you've been able to see what the questions are and how we should address them.
It's been a very lively response.
Actually, I see one of the questions I'd like to respond to right
Sure.
now.
Great.
Robert posted today an ISO 222 message. Doesn't have, for payment notification, it doesn't have a signature on it. That is absolutely correct. But ironically, ISO 222 is another one of our use cases. And we are standing up an ICA for it. Actually, it's already been stood up. And we're working with folks over at University Bank and their gateway, and we're going to be doing digital signatures on ISO 222 messages. So trying to keep ahead of you on that one.
We had another question, Jeff, maybe that you should handle. Could the digital signatures use existing private public keys like Apple's passkeys?
No, these will be completely separate keys. These would be completely separate certificates. And as I said, we are standing up a specific issuing CA for the QR code payment support. And that is the intent, that you would not reuse existing keys. That would confuse things too much. Could weaken the overall security.
We also had a couple questions, 3 questions, I think, on does this eliminate the need for a directory model? And Steve Wasserman, who's worked with us in the group very closely, had a response, and see what the rest of you think. It can use a directory, but that is optional depending on the payee PSP. The payload includes a directory type of information that the merchant payment accepts. Any comments on agreement?
Yeah, I agree with Steve. So it does not depend on a directory. If a financial institution has their own directory and they want to send through a tokenized bank account number or credit union account number, for example, they can, because by the time they're sort of notified of the payment, they can actually map that token back to the real bank account. So it is possible, but we're not requiring it because we don't have a nationwide directory here for payments. So it's possible to put that tokenized account number in a QR code payload and use that. And then the payee's PSP, again, will map it back to the right account number so they can make sure money goes to the right place. But ultimately, this QR code standard does not depend on a nationwide directory.
And would that directory also accommodate aliases, as we thought about in P2P?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and when you say an alias, it would just be a phone number, an email
or phone number.
Yeah, randomly generated. So the account number field, for example, in the payload can accommodate an alias, I think is the short answer to your question.
There you go. We had 2 questions on how does this fit, and they were very optimistic, into the rubric of being able to launch transactions on FedNow and other real-time payment systems. And we had one person chime in who's from Brazil, uses US BICs, and regales and how wonderful it is to receive the money instantly in this world. Huge advantage for cash flow and other aspects. How do we think as a group this fits? Is this a step forward that really makes adoption of real-time payments, which was part of our charter, something that's tangible in the near term.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately we have these amazing rails, two of them, RTP and FedNow. What is difficult particularly is the use case of a consumer paying a business with those rails. Somebody has to disclose their bank account routing number, which ultimately the QR code, if the biller or merchant can generate a QR code, which effectively embeds their financial account details, then that makes it a much easier way to push an instant payment from consumer to the biller, like we showed in the demo. So, and when you look at what happened in Brazil, and I think there are folks on the call who can probably weigh in on this too, but when Pix first came out, it was really just used for P2P. So everybody was just paying each other. And then merchants kind of realized, hey, this is a lot lower cost. It's quick. I can manage my cash better. I can generate a QR code now for payment because everyone's used to doing it to each other. And so they are the one, like once the merchants caught on to this benefits of the QR code, that's what really made the Pix use case of people paying businesses take off. I think it's still true that we call it P2B, people to business payments, is the fastest growing use case because it is so beneficial to merchants. And it's really something in the US, right? It's hard if I wanted to pay, a local business instantly, it would be really hard for me to do unless I had some sort of overlay technology that the biller was presenting to me and I had the ability to scan it and pay it.
Yeah, to just add to that a little bit, Steve, from the financial institution perspective, I think most financial institutions, as they look at the instant payment enablement, are looking at user experiences that can fully embed in their existing digital platforms that create send opportunities. So I think this certainly starts to bridge that opportunity for financial institutions and bridge their community in terms of what they can support in terms of their small business base or other constituents they would want to pay. So we're seeing some pretty strong positive response to the future of the opportunity.
Good. A couple of we've gotten pretty quickly into some complexities. Let me go back to a few questions that were more baseline. So, for example, question was, I frequently use a QR code on a restaurant bill to pay for a meal. Is that different in some way? Is the X9 standard new, different, better in some way?
Yeah, that's likely a version of a URL QR code where you're probably redirected to a landing page where you type in your credit card information and then it's a credit card purchase. So the way, and you're scanning that QR code from a camera. The way an X9 QR code would work is you have to scan it from within an authenticated app, like a bank mobile app, a credit union mobile app. And it works completely differently than that kind of probably Toast experience that you're talking about. And the X9 QR code enables you to push an instant payment versus sort of pulling a credit card transaction. So they're very different. And it is a way to actually move money from one financial account to another financial account, which that Toast experience typically can't do. I don't know, Keith, if you had any other thoughts on the comparison, but that's basically the bottom line.
Yep, no, I think you summarized it well.
Couple more foundational questions that came on early. Is there a way to tell a payment QR code from a URL QR code?
Yeah, I mean, the payment QR code is going to follow that string format, the EMV compliant string that we are developing in the standard. So any system that reads it's going to see that it's an X9 QR code and it's going to know, oh, okay, I got to go look for that URL to go make a call to get more payload information. A URL QR code is simply that. It's just a URL that kind of redirects you to get more information. So the back office systems that are sort of reading them know that they're very different. And
that's typically a static one, and the dynamic, there are indications in the construction of the QR code that will tip you off on that too.
Yep.
Another question, foundational. can the payment QR code be stored in a database?
Well, I mean, the QR code details and the payload details are stored in a database at typically the payee's PSP, right? So they're the ones generating the QR code. They're going to put that information in a secure database, and it's going to indicate even things like, when was that QR code generated? What's the status of that QR code? Is it active? Is it initiated? Is it paid? Is it canceled? Because they're going to want to track those types of things. So that data is put in a secure database. So when you say, can a payment QR code be put in the database, I think of it as like two different sets of data, right? The QR code itself and the details related to that, and then the payload. Those two together comprise a payment QR code, and yes, they would be stored in a secure database.
I would suggest that, could you take the QR code, because it is a digital object, and could you store it and the digital signature in your database? The answer is yes, but once you've used the QR code, it can't be used again. This is a one-time use. So you could, if you want to have an audit trail or something like that, but otherwise there's no real reason to keep it. But yeah, the latency wise, the QR code digital signature could be re-verified 5 years from now, although that certificate may have expired.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a few questions on the basis of, we don't see a network in this mix of infrastructure. And what are your thoughts about fees? Are you addressing the costs or fees as part of the motivation to adopt real-time payment standards through QR codes, or is that something left to the participants?
Good question. I mean, we're not addressing economics in the standard work group for sure, right? We're just enabling it, and the ecosystem's going to have to figure out some of those details. We know typically, an instant payment network charges 4.5 cents to move the money, but there's other players involved, PSPs, for example, but you don't have as many parties in the middle as you would, say, another type of network. So there are going to be fees that need to get figured out. How much does a biller or merchant's payment services provider charge to generate a QR code available for payment, for example? But even when you kind of sketch out rough economics of what it might look like, it's likely going to be a pretty cost-effective option for a biller or merchant, and they get their money instantly, which is of high value to them. So I'd say that's still the economics around who gets paid what in a QR code transaction. That's still a work in progress. But right now, for our standard setting group, we're working on just enabling that. And we have been, I know there are different parties that have been working on trying to figure out, okay, what might be the economics that would be stood up around this kind of a standard.
Actually, I've got a comment here, but on a different question. I want to throw a question to you, Sarah. Someone asked earlier, how can you tell the difference between a regular QR code and X9 QR code? And I was thinking not just the content of what the applications programmatically is going to be looking at, but also its display. And
Yeah.
I know you guys were kicking around the idea. For those of you who not know this, you can actually put a logo inside the center of a QR code and it will still work because the data is encoded around it. And you were kicking around the idea of possibly putting the X9 logo inside an X9 QR code. And I'm curious, where's that discussion point? That was kind of fun.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, Jeff. So we have talked about this in the work group. We know it's going to be really important to make sure anyone paying an X9 QR code knows it's an X9 QR code. Oh, I've got to go into my mobile banking app to scan it, for example. So there will be an effort to think through that branding, whether it's a symbol, whether it's a name, whether it's marketing. We've kind of talked about it in the work group. We may end up, there's some interested parties just in the ecosystem that aren't necessarily X9 members that are really interested in that. I'm confident it will happen. Whether we tackle it as a part of the work group is a little bit undecided, but it is definitely, we know, needed. Whenever we kind of talk about payment QR codes with other entities, billers, merchants that want to use it, that have an interest in this standard, they go, you got to brand it. We have to make sure the entire industry knows when they generate it, that's an X9. So that's in the works. I'm glad you brought it up. I don't have details on like what it's going to be called or what it might look like. And, you know, but I think there's going to be a group of companies either from the X9 work group itself or adjacent to it that will be tackling that as we go through the rest of the year to make sure, because I think it is going to be a key part of this being successful and employed by a lot of different parties.
Well, and as the security professional, also you have to think about, so anyone could display a QR code with the X9 logo in it. However, the QR code is going to have a digital signature around it that will include that logo, and it would chain up to one of the X9 financial PKI routes. And therefore, they would be able to verify that this is a real X9 certificate or X9 QR code versus somebody just faking it, because their signature and their certificate chain will not go to our routes.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have to watch that very carefully.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
More on the infrastructure. What are the prospects of banks adopting this, and will they require or want or utilize third-party PSP type companies in order to get the infrastructure off the ground and into the firmament of the economy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to depend on, it's going to be sort of a case by case thing. We know that there are a lot of digital banking providers, for example, that have, you know, hundreds of banking customers, for example. And if that digital banking provider is able to embed, say, you know, I'm going to use the words that Keith uses, a composable experience in their digital app, that then can enable this capability to roll out very quickly. A lot's going to depend on, the specific financial institution and the really probably the demand of their corporate customers for this type of capability, and then to be able to have their consumers be able to scan and pay it. So part of what we're trying to do is just make it easy for those that do want to be early adopters to get up and running quickly to be able to enable this kind of QR code payment. I don't know, Keith.
Yeah, I've actually saw
Okay.
in my own work, I've seen in the last 6 to 8 months real interest coming from banks, and that includes everything they're trying to do to support real-time payments on these new networks. And by the way, there was a question: are there other networks like push to card, and other capabilities that would support with this? We're agnostic. However people want to pay and they want to utilize it for their interface, they should be able to do that. We have several questions, interestingly, about what's the potential for this in Europe. Questions about how this relates to Wero, Europay. It's spelled EUROPA, not the PAY that Jeff and I used to contend with decades ago. Does the technology work in SEPA instant rails? And Robert, who had a bunch of questions, pointed out that Nexo standards are trying to facilitate multiple payment capabilities, payment agnosticity. There's a word. And I'd like to hear what you guys think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I know that this could be used in any country. Ultimately, it's very flexibly designed. So, and I know there have been conversations with other countries about, hey, if you are trying to figure out what you're going to do around a QR code, why don't you use the X9 QR code standard? So I think it definitely can be leveraged in other countries. There's an ability for that to happen. And I know there have been conversations that have happened with Europe, with other countries in South America, I'm trying to remember all the regions. But anyway, it is possible. I mean, we really want to get it, finalized and approved here for the US, but it is designed to be something that other countries can take on as well.
Well, it's also part of the charter of X9 feeding into ISO. Ultimately, we'd like to have everything connect everywhere, since digitally that's possible. It'd be nice if we could all do our payments and other transactions accordingly. The boy, there's so many good questions. We should
Well,
probably have a webinar just to do just to go through the questions.
Well, and I'm looking at the clock. I'm seeing that we're a couple of minutes over. I wonder,
Yeah.
I mean, we will get a copy of these questions. Perhaps we can address them in a follow-up email that we send to participants here. Because yeah, I think to your point, Steve, we could be spending a lot more time trying to answer them. But why don't we put a pin in them at this point? We'll look at them and we will respond and send it in an email. Perhaps, I know, Ambria, you said that the recording will go out likely tomorrow. We'll either include answers in that, or we can have a separate email that goes out that can address these questions.
And
Sounds
Sarah,
good.
are you going to take the presentation and publish it also?
Yes, definitely. That will be shared to all the participants.
Today's version, right?
Yes, today's version.
And I just want to answer one more question from Walter. How do you anticipate consumer behavioral adoption? I'd say get out of the way. Consumers will vote with their feet very, very enthusiastically from everything I've seen around the world.
I mean, I look at some of the financial institutions that have enabled instant payment send, for example. They don't do any marketing, and they're always so surprised that the consumers see it's available and they start using it. So I do think that there's a potential for that to be happening with the QR codes as well. Once they understand, what's possible. That's typically what we've seen financial institutions experience with instant payments.
Come join us. Come help us.
Yes.
Appreciate your enthusiasm.
We really appreciate everyone participating today, and encourage everyone to get involved who is interested in this, and we will work to address your questions. And any other comments, feedback, whatever, please reach out to any one of us, and would love to continue the conversation on payment QR codes. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.